The rain hammered down on the granite tombstone as Victoria Matthews dropped to her knees, her designer dress soaking through instantly. But it wasn't the cold that made her freeze. It was a woman already there, clutching a baby wrapped in torn blankets, sobbing so violently her entire body shook. "Please, Marcus," the stranger wailed at the grave. "Your daughter needs you. We have nowhere to go." Victoria's blood ran cold. Daughter? Her son had been dead for 3 years. This had to be some cruel scam, another vulture trying to feed on her grief and fortune. She wanted to scream, to call security, to make this woman disappear. Instead, she found herself staring at the baby's face and seeing Marcus's eyes looking back at her. If you think you know where the story is going, wait until you hear what happens next. Make sure you're subscribed because this journey will break your heart before it heals it. Victoria rose to her feet slowly, her wet clothes clinging to her skin, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. The woman hadn't even noticed her presence yet, too lost in her grief and desperation. She looked no older than 25, with matted hair plastered to her face and clothes that were little more than rags. Her bare feet were covered in mud, and the baby in her arms couldn't have been more than 2 years old. The child's eyes were wide and alert despite the rain, those unmistakable hazel-green eyes that Victoria had loved in her son. "Who are you?" Victoria's voice cut through the rain like a knife, sharp and commanding. The young woman's head snapped up, terror flooding her face as she scrambled backward, nearly dropping the baby. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," she stammered, trying to shield the child from the rain with her own body. "I didn't mean to disturb anyone. We'll leave right now." Victoria stepped closer, her expensive heels sinking into the mud, her eyes locked on the baby. Every instinct told her to walk away, to protect herself from another heartbreak, from another lie. She had heard it all before. The schemes, the fake paternity claims, the desperate people who thought her money could solve their problems. But something about this woman's tears felt different. They weren't calculated or performed. They were raw and real, the kind of pain that couldn't be faked. "That child," Victoria said, her voice trembling despite her attempt to stay cold. "How old is she?" The woman clutched the baby tighter, her lips quivering. 2 years and 4 months. Her name is Maya. Victoria did the math instantly. Marcus had died 3 years and 1 month ago in that terrible accident on Lagos-Ibadan Expressway. The timeline fit perfectly, horribly, perfectly, and you're claiming my son as a father. The question came out harsh, accusatory, exactly as Victoria intended. The young woman's face crumpled, fresh tears mixing with the rain. "I'm not claiming anything. I know you don't believe me. Nobody does. I've been coming here every week for 2 years, talking to him, telling him about his daughter, begging him for help even though he's gone." She laughed bitterly, a sound that was more pain than humor. "I must look crazy, right? A homeless girl talking to a dead man, making up stories about sleeping with a billionaire's son. That's what everyone thinks. That's what my own family said before they threw me out." Her voice broke completely. "But Maya is his daughter. I swear on everything holy. Marcus was the only man I've ever been with. He promised me we'd be together, that he'd tell you about us, but then the accident happened and I found out I was pregnant and your security wouldn't even let me near your house and I had nowhere to go and nobody believed me and..." She collapsed into sobs again, her whole story pouring out in a desperate flood. Victoria stood frozen, watching this woman break apart in the mud beside her son's grave. She wanted to call her a liar. She wanted to have her arrested for trespassing and fraud. But she couldn't stop staring at the baby, at Maya, who had stopped crying and was now looking directly at her with those eyes, Marcus's eyes, her grandson's eyes. 3 years of grief crashed over Victoria like a tidal wave. 3 years of wishing she had one more day with her son, one more chance to tell him she loved him, one more opportunity to hold something of his in her arms. And here was this child, possibly carrying her son's blood, being raised in poverty while Victoria lived in her mansion alone. "Come with me," Victoria heard herself say, the word surprising even her. The young woman looked up, confusion and hope battling across her face. "What?" Victoria pulled out her phone, hands shaking. "I'm calling my driver." We're going to get you out of this rain, get that baby warm and fed, and then we're going to talk. If you're lying to me, I'll know, and there will be consequences." She paused, her voice dropping to something dangerous. "But if you're telling the truth..." She couldn't finish the sentence. The possibilities were too overwhelming, too painful, too desperately hopeful. What Victoria didn't know was that this decision would uncover secrets about her son's final days that would shatter everything she thought she knew. Comment below if you think this woman is telling the truth, and don't forget to hit that like button. This story is just getting started. The young woman's name was Grace Okonkwo, and she told her story in Victoria's penthouse while wrapped in a borrowed robe, her daughter finally clean and sleeping in her arms. Victoria sat across from her in the living room that overlooked Lagos's glittering skyline, her face an unreadable mask as she listened. Grace spoke of meeting Marcus at a charity event 2 years before his death, where she had been serving as a waitress. He had noticed her, talked to her, seen her as more than just help. They had fallen in love in secret, or at least she had fallen in love. Marcus had promised to tell his mother about their relationship once the time was right. But that time never came. "He said you were particular about the women he dated," Grace said quietly, not meeting Victoria's eyes. "That you wanted him to marry someone from a good family, someone with education and connections. I was nobody, a girl from Ajigun with barely enough money to eat. He said he needed to prepare you first." Victoria's jaw tightened, a flash of anger crossing her face. Not at Grace, but at the truth in those words. Victoria had been particular. She had introduced Marcus to dozens of suitable young women from wealthy families, women who could match his status and bring good connections to the family business. She had never hidden her expectations, had never pretended she wouldn't have opinions about his future wife. But she also believed her son would have come to her eventually if he truly loved someone. Marcus had never been afraid of her, had never backed down from important conversations. Why would he hide an entire relationship, an entire person he claimed to love? "If he loved you so much," Victoria said, her voice cold and skeptical, "why didn't I find any trace of you after he died? No photos, no messages, nothing. I went through everything trying to hold on to him. There was nothing about you." Grace flinched as if she'd been slapped, but she held Victoria's gaze. "He kept everything on a separate phone. He said it was safer that way, that you had access to his regular phone for business. He bought a cheap phone just for us. I still have it." She reached into the pocket of her old dress, which was now dry on a nearby chair, and pulled out an ancient Nokia phone with a cracked screen. Victoria took the phone with trembling hands and turned it on. The battery was nearly dead, but there was enough power to see the messages. Hundreds of them, going back months before Marcus's death. Text after text of her son saying he loved this girl, making promises, planning a future. Photos of them together, Marcus smiling in ways Victoria hadn't seen in his official photographs, relaxed and genuinely happy. Videos of him talking to Grace's belly, telling their unborn baby about the life they would have together. "I'm going to tell my mother this weekend," he said in one video dated just days before the accident. "I promise, Grace, we're going to be a family. She'll understand once she sees how happy you make me." Victoria's eyes filled with tears as she watched her son, alive again on this tiny screen, making promises he would never be able to keep. She had lost him twice now, once to death, and once to the realization that she hadn't known him as well as she thought. "Why didn't you come to me immediately after he died?" Victoria demanded, wiping her eyes roughly. "Why wait until you were homeless and desperate?" Grace's expression hardened, a flash of the strength that had kept her surviving on the streets showing through. "I tried, Mrs. Matthews. The day after the funeral, I went to your house. Your security guards laughed at me, called me a gold digger, a liar, said 100 girls show up every year claiming to have been with Marcus. They threatened to have me arrested if I came back. I was 6 months pregnant, mourning the man I loved, and being treated like trash because I didn't look like I belonged in your world." She shifted Maya in her arms, her voice rising with years of suppressed anger. "I went to your office building 3 times. Same treatment. I wrote you letters. They were thrown away before you ever saw them. I tried to go to the press, but nobody believed me without proof, and by then I'd sold a phone trying to pay for food. I got it back from the pawn shop 2 months ago after saving for a year. Victoria felt something crack inside her chest. How many people had turned Grace away in her name? How many had decided this young woman wasn't worthy of even being heard? I didn't know, she whispered. But Grace wasn't finished. You want to know the worst part? Grace's voice shook with emotion, with years of holding everything inside finally breaking free. Marcus talked about you all the time. How strong you were. How you built your business from nothing after his father died. How you never gave up on anything you believed in. He admired you so much, Mrs. Matthews. He wanted us to have that kind of strength together. And I believed him when he said you would accept me once you knew me. But the woman he described would never have built walls so high that someone telling the truth couldn't climb them. The accusation hung in the air between them, sharp and undeniable. Victoria opened her mouth to defend herself, to explain how many scammers and liars she had dealt with over the years, but no words came. Because Grace was right. She had built walls. She had taught her staff to protect her from anyone seeking money opportunity. She had created a fortress around her grief that locked out even the possibility of truth. I need proof, Victoria finally said, standing up. DNA test. Tomorrow. If Maya is Marcus's daughter, everything changes. If she's not... She didn't finish the threat. Grace nodded slowly, clutching her daughter tighter. And if the test proves she's your granddaughter, what then? Will you take her from me because I'm poor? Is that how this story ends? The question hit Victoria like a punch, and suddenly she wasn't sure what she wanted the test to reveal. Because either way, nothing would ever be the same again. Make sure you watch what happens next, because the test result will change everything you think you know. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss it. The DNA test came back positive with 99.9% certainty. Maya Okonkwo was Marcus Matthews' daughter. Victoria sat alone in her office staring at the results, and for the first time since her son's funeral, she allowed herself to completely break down. Her security team had found her like that. The most powerful businesswoman in West Africa sobbing at her desk at 3 a.m, clutching a piece of paper that proved her son's legacy lived on. Grace had been right. About everything. And Victoria had almost missed knowing her only grandchild because of pride and protection and walls built too high. She made the call immediately. Grace, pack whatever belongings you have. You and Maya are moving into the house. Today. Right now. I'm sending the car. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, then quiet crying. Thank you, Grace whispered. Thank you for believing me. For believing in Maya. Victoria hung up and stared at the Lagos skyline through her floor-to-ceiling windows. Believing was just the beginning. What came next would be much harder. The first month of living together was a disaster. Grace couldn't adapt to having household staff serve her meals, couldn't understand why Victoria wanted to enroll Maya in expensive preschool programs, couldn't accept the designer clothes and jewelry Victoria tried to give her. I don't need to be made over like some charity case. Grace snapped one evening when Victoria suggested a complete wardrobe change. Maya is your granddaughter. That's what matters. I don't need to become someone else to deserve being here. Victoria had bristled at the rejection, at the ingratitude. She was offering Grace the world, safety, comfort, opportunity, and the girl acted like it was an insult. You're living in my home, eating my food, under my protection, Victoria shot back. The least you can do is look presentable. Do you know what people will say if they see you dressed like that? They'll say I'm neglecting you, or worse, that you're just using me. Grace's eyes flashed dangerously. So this is about your reputation? About how things look. I thought this was about family. About Maya. I guess Marcus was wrong about you after all. The words cut deeper than Victoria wanted to admit. They stopped speaking to each other after that fight, communicating only through the household staff in short, cold exchanges about Maya's schedule. Victoria threw herself into wake, making plans for Maya's future, trust funds, education accounts, introducing her to business partners as her granddaughter and heir. Grace spent her days in her suite of rooms, playing with Maya and carefully avoiding the rest of the house. The staff gossiped about the tension, about how sad it was that Mrs. Matthews had finally found her granddaughter only to push away the child's mother. But Victoria told herself she was doing what was necessary. She was protecting Maya's future, ensuring the girl would have every advantage Victoria could provide. If Grace couldn't understand that, it was Grace's problem, not Hayes. Then one night, Victoria came home to find Grace packing bags, tears streaming down her face while Maya slept in a crib that cost more than Grace had earned in her entire life. "What are you doing?" Victoria demanded. "We're leaving," Grace said without looking up. "This was a mistake. You don't want a family, Mrs. Matthews. You want to control people, to shape them into what you think they should be. I won't let Maya grow up learning that love comes with conditions." Victoria felt panic rise in her chest, sharp and overwhelming. "You can't take her. She's my granddaughter. She deserves everything I can give her." Grace finally looked up, and her expression was devastated but determined. She deserves a mother who isn't being crushed under the weight of someone else's expectations. She deserves to grow up knowing she's enough exactly as she is, not always trying to prove she belongs. "I thought you understood that after everything I went through trying to reach you, but you're doing the same thing to me that your walls did, deciding I'm not good enough because I don't fit your vision." The accusation was too close to the truth, and Victoria lashed out. "Fine, leave then. But understand that if you walk out that door with my granddaughter, you'll regret it. I have lawyers, Grace. I have resources you can't imagine. I can prove you're an unfit mother, homeless, uneducated, no stable income. I can take Maya from you legally, and there's nothing you can do to stop me." The silence that followed was deafening. Grace stared at Victoria with an expression of complete betrayal. "You would do that? After everything? After I trusted you with the truth about Marcus?" Victoria's hands shook, but she didn't back down. "I'll do whatever it takes to protect my granddaughter's future. That's what mothers do." Grace laughed, but it was a hollow, broken sound. "No, Mrs. Matthews. That's what you do. Marcus told me about his father, about how you drove him to work himself to death trying to meet your standards. He said he didn't want to end up like that, always chasing approval that never came. That's why he kept me secret. Not because he was ashamed, but because he knew you'd tried to change me, to mold me into someone you could accept. And he was right." She picked up Maya, who had woken up crying from all the shouting. "I'll stay. For now. Because Maya deserves to know her grandmother, and because I don't have anywhere else to go. But hear me clearly. I'm staying as myself, not as whatever version of me you're trying to create. And if you ever threaten to take my daughter from me again, I'll disappear in the middle of the night and you'll never see her again, resources or not." Grace walked out of the room, leaving Victoria standing alone, surrounded by luxury that suddenly felt empty. She had won, but it felt like losing. And somewhere deep in her heart, she heard Marcus's voice from that old video. "She'll understand once she sees how happy you make me." But Victoria hadn't tried to understand. She had only tried to control, and now she risked losing the only family she had left. Don't click away now. The next chapter reveals a secret about Marcus's death that will change everything. Like this video if you're still watching. 3 months pass in cold civility. Victoria and Grace existed in the same house like strangers, sharing only brief conversations about Maya's needs and nothing more. Victoria buried herself in work, expanding her real estate empire and attending charity galas where she smiled for cameras and pretended her personal life wasn't crumbling. Grace spent her days with Maya, occasionally taking classes at a local community college that Victoria had enrolled her in without asking. They were both miserable, both too proud to admit it, both drowning in their own stubbornness. Then one afternoon, a man named David Nwosu appeared at Victoria's office claiming to have information about Marcus's accident. He was nervous, sweating through his cheap suit, clutching an envelope like his life depended on it. "Mrs. Matthews," he said, his voice shaking, "I was a mechanic who serviced your son's car the day before he died. I need to tell you something I should have said 3 years ago. Your son's brakes didn't fail by accident. They were tampered with. Marcus was murdered. Victoria felt the world tilt sideways. What did you say? David pulled out documents from the envelope. Service records, photos of brake lines that had been deliberately cut, witness statements he'd been too afraid to give the police at the time. I saw someone in the garage that morning, someone who didn't belong there. I didn't think anything of it until I heard about the accident. By then, I was too scared to come forward. The police had already ruled it mechanical failure. Nobody wanted to hear that it might be murder, especially when it involved someone as powerful as your family. He was crying now, guilt and fear pouring out of him. I've lived with this every day for 3 years, Mrs. Matthews. Every day. But I saw your interview last month, the one where you talked about your granddaughter, about finding family again. And I realized I couldn't keep this secret anymore. Your son didn't die because of bad luck or faulty equipment. Someone killed him, and that person has been walking free while you've been grieving. Victoria's mind raced through possibilities, through enemies and business rivals and anyone who might have wanted Marcus dead. Who was in the garage that morning? Did you see their face? David shook his head. It was too dark, and they wore a hood. But I remember the walk, the way they moved. It was someone familiar with the building, someone who knew where the security cameras didn't reach. He paused, his next words coming out barely above a whisper. I think it was someone from inside your company, Mrs. Matthews. Someone close to your family. Victoria felt sick. For 3 years, she had mourned Marcus as a victim of chance, of cruel fate. But if David was telling the truth, then someone had deliberately taken her son from her. Someone she probably knew, someone she probably trusted. Why come forward now? She demanded. After 3 years, why now? David met her eyes with desperate honesty. Because I have a daughter too, Mrs. Matthews. She's 7 years old. And I realized that if something happened to me because I kept this secret, she'd grow up without a father, without answers, just like your granddaughter. I couldn't do that to her. I couldn't do that to you anymore. Victoria sent David away with assurances of protection and a promise that she would investigate. Then she sat alone in her office, staring at the documents that turned her son's death from tragedy into murder. She should call the police, should start an official investigation immediately. But something made her hesitate. If the killer was truly someone close to the family, someone inside her company, then going public might tip them off before she could find proof. She needed help, but help from someone she could trust absolutely. Someone who had nothing to gain by betraying her. She needed Grace. The realization hit her hard. For 3 months, she had treated Grace like an obligation, like someone to be managed rather than trusted. But Grace had proven herself loyal beyond measure. She had kept loving Marcus even after he died, had raised his daughter alone in poverty rather than give her up, had stayed in Victoria's house even after being threatened because she believed Maya deserved to know her grandmother. If Victoria couldn't trust Grace with this truth, then she couldn't trust anyone. She went home and found Grace reading to Maya in the nursery, their voices soft and happy in a way that made Victoria's chest ache. "Grace," she said from the doorway, "I need to talk to you. About Marcus. About how he really died." Grace looked up, suspicion and confusion crossing her face. "What are you talking about?" Victoria told her everything. About David's visit, about the evidence of tampering, about the possibility that Marcus had been murdered by someone they knew. As she spoke, she watched Grace's expression shift from disbelief to horror to burning rage. Someone killed him. Grace whispered, her hands shaking as she clutched the storybook. Someone deliberately took him from us, from Maya. Victoria nodded. And I think they are still out there. Possibly still in my company, still pretending to be loyal while they destroyed my family. Grace stood up slowly, carefully placing Maya in her crib before turning to face Victoria with an intensity that was almost frightening. "Then we find them," she said, her voice hard as steel. "We find out who did this, and we make them pay. Not for revenge, but for justice. For Marcus, for Maya's right to know what really happened to her father." Victoria felt something shift between them in that moment, something fundamental. They weren't adversaries anymore. They were allies. They were family united by grief and determination. "I'm sorry," Victoria said quietly, "for how I've treated you, for trying to change you instead of accepting you, for making you feel like you had to earn your place here. Marcus was right to love you. I see that now." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "And I'm sorry for judging you without understanding the weight you've been carrying all these years. Marcus loved you too, Mrs. Matthews. He talked about you like you were the strongest person in the world. Let's prove him right. Let's find out what really happened to him." They hugged for the first time since Grace had moved in, both of them crying, both of them finally letting down the walls they built between them. When they pulled apart, Grace's expression was determined. "So where do we start?" Victoria smiled grimly. "We start by looking at everyone who was close to Marcus in his final days. His business partners, his friends, anyone who might have had a motive to want him dead." She paused, remembering something. There was one person Marcus had been arguing with before he died. James Okafor, my business partner of 15 years. He wanted Marcus to sign off on a development deal, but Marcus refused. He said something about it didn't feel right, that he needed more time to review the contracts. They had a heated argument the week before the accident. Grace's eyes narrowed. "Then we start with James. And Mrs. Matthews? I still have that phone with all of Marcus's messages. Maybe there's something in there that can help us, something we missed before." As they began planning their investigation, neither of them noticed a figure standing in the shadows of the hallway, listening to every word they said. The person who had killed Marcus Matthews was still in the house, still close to the family, and now they knew they were being hunted. What would happen next would test Victoria and Grace's new alliance in ways they couldn't imagine. Stay tuned for the explosive finale. You won't believe who the killer is. Subscribe now. Victoria set a trap. She announced at a company board meeting that she had discovered new evidence about Marcus's death and would be holding a private memorial service where she would reveal everything she knew. She invited only the people who had been closest to Marcus in his final days: James Okafor, her business partner; Sarah Chen, Marcus's executive assistant; Daniel Adebayo, his best friend from university; and 3 other board members who had worked directly with her son. Grace attended too, standing beside Victoria in the penthouse's main room where the gathering took place, both of them watching every face, every reaction. "Thank you all for coming," Victoria began, her voice steady despite the fear churning in her stomach. "I know this is unusual, but I've recently learned that Marcus's death may not have been an accident. Someone in this room knows what really happened that day." The tension in the room became suffocating. People shifted uncomfortably, exchanged nervous glances, and waited for Victoria to continue. She told them about David's testimony, about the tampered brake lines, about the evidence that pointed to murder. As she spoke, she watched for tells, for fear, for guilt, for any sign of who might break under pressure. It was Sarah Chen who cracked first. Marcus's executive assistant started crying quietly, her hands covering her face as her whole body shook. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Matthews," she sobbed. "I knew something was wrong. Marcus told me he was being threatened, that someone was pressuring him about the development deal. He said if anything happened to him, I should look at the contract details, that he'd hidden evidence in his files. But after he died, I was too scared to say anything. I thought maybe I'd imagined it, that I was making connections that weren't there. And then time passed and it felt too late to speak up." Victoria felt her heart racing. "What kind of threats? From who?" Sarah lifted her tear-stained face. "He wouldn't tell me exactly. He just said someone stood to lose a lot of money if he didn't sign off on the Lekki Peninsula development deal, and they weren't going to let him stand in their way. He gave me a USB drive the week before he died and told me to hide it, to only look at it if something happened to him. I still have it. I've had it this whole time." James Okafor stood up abruptly, his face red with anger. "This is absurd. Victoria, you're accusing your own colleagues, your own friends, of murder based on some mechanic story and a grief-stricken assistant's paranoid memories? Marcus died in an accident. A tragic, terrible accident. Let him rest in peace." But Victoria noticed the sweat on James's forehead, the way his hands trembled slightly as he spoke. "Sit down, James," she said coldly. "Sarah, where's the USB drive?" Sarah pulled it from her purse with shaking hands and gave it to Victoria. "I'm sorry I didn't come forward sooner. I was afraid." Victoria plugged the drive into her laptop and opened the files. What she found made her blood run cold. Marcus had compiled months of evidence showing that the Lekki Peninsula development deal was a massive fraud scheme. The land didn't have proper permits. The environmental reports were falsified, and millions of dollars were being funneled through shell companies. And at the center of it all was James Okafor, who stood to make a fortune if the deal went through. Marcus had been about to expose everything the day before he died. "James," Victoria said, her voice deadly quiet, "you killed my son to protect a real estate scam." Jamesy's face went white, then purple with rage. He was going to destroy everything. 20 years of building this company, of growing our empire, and he wanted to throw it away over some paperwork issues. I tried to reason with him, tried to make him understand that business requires compromise sometimes, but he wouldn't listen. He was going to go to the authorities. Victoria, he was going to ruin us all. The room erupted in chaos. Daniel lunged at James, screaming that Marcus had been his best friend. The other board members were shouting, some backing away from James in horror, others demanding he explain himself. But Victoria just stood there, staring at the man she had trusted for 15 years, the man who had eaten dinner at her table, who had held baby Marcus in his arms, who had pretended to grieve at the funeral while knowing exactly what he'd done. "You didn't just take my son from me," Victoria said, her voice cutting through the noise. "You took his daughter's father. You made Gray suffer alone for 3 years. You let me die inside thinking it was just bad luck, just fate, all for money." James's expression turned desperate. "I never meant for it to go that far. I just wanted to scare him, to make the car malfunction so he'd miss the meeting with the authorities. I didn't know the brakes would fail completely on the highway. It was supposed to be minor, just enough to what?" Grace's voice rang out, clear and furious. She stepped forward, holding Maya in her arms, both of them representing everything James had tried to destroy. To hurt him just enough that he'd be too afraid to speak up? To show him that you could reach him anytime you wanted? "You're a murderer, Mr. Okafor, and you're a coward." James stared at Maya, seeing Marcus's eyes looking back at him, and something in him seemed to break. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." But sorry wasn't enough. Victoria had already called the police before the meeting started, had already sent them copies of all the evidence. They arrived minutes later and arrested James while everyone watched. As he was led away in handcuffs, still muttering apologies that no one wanted to hear, Victoria finally allowed herself to breathe. 3 years of questions finally had answers. 3 years of grief finally had direction. Her son's death hadn't been meaningless. It had been a sacrifice for truth, for justice, for refusing to compromise his integrity even when it cost him everything. The aftermath took months to sort out. James Okafor was convicted of manslaughter and fraud, sentenced to 25 years in prison. The company was restructured, the corrupt board members removed, and Marcus's legacy was finally honored properly. Victoria established a foundation in his name dedicated to corporate transparency and protecting whistleblowers. But more importantly, she and Grace built something real together, a family forged not by blood alone but by shared pain, shared purpose, and shared love for the man they both lost. Grace finished a degree in business administration and joined Victoria in running the company, bringing fresh perspectives and genuine compassion to every decision they made. Maya grew up in the penthouse surrounded by love, knowing exactly who her father was and why he had died, not as a victim of random chance, but as a hero who stood up for what was right. On the 5th anniversary of Marcus's death, Victoria and Grace stood together at his grave again, this time with 4-year-old Maya between them holding flowers. "Tell Daddy we miss him," Grace said gently, and Maya placed the flowers on the stone with her little hands. "I wish I knew him," Maya said, looking up at Victoria with those familiar hazel green eyes. but Grandma tells me stories about him all the time. He was brave, right? Victoria knelt down and hugged her granddaughter tightly. He was the bravest man I ever knew, and he would be so proud of you, baby girl. So proud of your mother for raising you with such love and strength. So proud of all of us for finding each other. She looked up at Grace, and they shared a smile that held 3 years of struggle, of growth, of learning to be family in ways neither had expected. You know what Marcus told me the week before he died? Grace said quietly, her eyes on the tombstone. He said family isn't just about blood or money or meeting expectations. It's about showing up for each other when things get hard, about choosing to love each other even when it's inconvenient. I didn't understand what he meant then, but I do now. Victoria stood up, taking Grace's hand on one side and Maya's on the other. So do I, and it only took almost losing both of you to figure it out. As they walked back to the car together, a real family built from tragedy and truth and hard-won understanding, Victoria silently thanked her son for one last gift. He had brought Grace and Maya into her life, had shown her that walls built to protect can also imprison, and had taught her that the strongest legacy wasn't money or power. It was love that refused to give up even in the darkest times. The billionaire who had once visited her son's grave alone, drowning in grief and isolation, was gone. In her place was a grandmother, a mother-in-law, a partner in both business and family who finally understood what Marcus had tried to tell her all along. Real wealth wasn't measured in bank accounts. It was measured in the people you chose to stand beside, the people you fought for, and the people who fought for you. And by that measure, Victoria Matthews had become the richest woman in the world. If this story touched your heart, show some love by liking this video and sharing it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications because we share real, emotional stories that remind us all what truly matters in life. Drop a comment below telling us what you thought about Victoria and Grace's journey. We read every single one. Thank you for watching. And remember, family isn't about perfection. It's about never giving up on each other. See you in the next story.